Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV. Hi everyone, welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, episode 47. My name's Andrew Wildman.
And I'm Simon Furman.
And what are we talking about today, Simon?
Well, we're picking up from the tail end of last podcast. We were talking then much more about the writing side of comics and, our early experiences with my experience with writing for comics, a little bit about Andrew drawing for comics. But I think we're going to switch the focus more to you and talk about your very early comics work and how the art and craft has developed over the years.
Yes, because we go back such a long way. I was thinking about this, and we go back such a long way that obviously, inevitably, the kind of technology and everything has changed everything. I guess it has for you, I suppose. Did you, when you were first writing comics, were you like literally on an old typewriter?
Yeah. First was a manual typewriter. I remember typing Dracula file scripts or whatever for Scream on a proper old-fashioned manual typewriter plus Tipex. But fairly quickly I graduated to a electric typewriter and then an electric typewriter with one of those little strips of a screen. So you could see the sentence you were typing on a screen before it transferred to the paper. So it would get to the end of a line. So you had a little moment to do some corrections before it printed out that line.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. High tech.
That was the future. That was.
Yeah. Well, less Tipex, and
I guess
and less just kind of, old-fashioned XXXs through words and things or crossings out. I'm sure my original scripts were a sight to see, really. Although I have got some somewhere because I did for, the Hibernia Comics. They'd unearthed a Nightcomers story I did for Scream that was never published. And they'd found some of my original scripts for it, some of the art, and basically, in fact, no, all of the art, but not all of the scripts. And they wanted me to finish it off, to do the dialogue for the other parts, and they published it as one of their one-off Hibernia Press, licensed under Rebellion, of course.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating, literally, to see those first typed scripts from way back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of XXXs and Tipex all over the place. But yeah,
And were you like? Because I seem to remember there were daisy wheel typewriters and golf ball typewriters.
Yeah.
Did you ever have one of those?
I think I had both. Yeah, I certainly had a golf ball typewriter at one point. And like I said, I think that might have been that one with the little screen strip, because then it would just type out that line really fast. And the golf ball, I think, could do that.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, with art. Okay, so so in terms of materials, my kind of earliest memories of as beginning when I was really interested in comics as a reader when I was young, and then I started to kind of draw stuff, as a kid. So just like copying stuff out of comics and all that kind of thing. It would just be what was to hand. So it would be whatever paper, and then it would just be like a ballpoint pen or tempo pens. I don't know if you can you still get tempo pens? They're like,
I don't know. I remember them.
Pens. Yeah, felt tip pens. And I kind of like those because it looked like ink, I guess. I don't know. But so that's what I did for a long time. And I did loads of drawings on the back of my school exercise books. I think I've
Yeah.
posted pictures of those before. But then, in terms of working out actually what you needed to use to draw a page of artwork, I think the first thing that I ever discovered that might be the thing for that was when I went to art college.
Yeah.
So one of the tutors would have, I probably did an illustration using just a felt tip pen or whatever. And they said, oh, no, you don't want to use that. You want to use this. So they were the first people to give me a bottle of ink and a dip pen, like a metal, dip
Yep.
pen. I was like, what the hell is this? But they said, oh, that's how illustrators, so they didn't really know anything about comics, but
No.
that's how pen and ink illustrators, would do their work. So I tried to get used to those, which I found very clunky and difficult. And then I think the next thing that happened was when I joined the SSI, so the Society of Strip Illustrators in London, which was a group of artists and writers, quite a few of which were from comics, from the British comics industry. Obviously no American comics industry in the UK at that point, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Marvel UK, but yeah, I suppose it was the early days of that. But there were the British comics, the war comics, football comics, and 2000 AD, very definitely. So I started to meet artists then. So when I first turned up at the SSI, it probably was like 1981, 82, something like that. One of the first people I met was Dave Gibbons, and he did. I didn't even know who he was. He did a review of my portfolio because I took my portfolio along because I knew there were going to be lots of industry professionals there, and I thought, oh, I'll see if I can get some work. Yeah, fat chance, And Dave looked through it, and he said some things, some good things and some constructive criticism, all that kind of thing. I mean, I was massively offended because I thought I was ready to go. Who is this guy telling me what's wrong with my work?
Yeah.
But then seeing other people and then seeing other people's work, because they would bring work in to the meetings, it's like, oh wow, is that how you do it? Oh, is that what size you draw it? All that kind of thing. Oh, a brush. Yes. Oh wow, that's nice. Yeah. So then I learned all the techniques of working on Bristol Board, either the kind of smooth Bristol Board that we had in the UK. Some people would work on, I think it was called CS10 paper, which was very much an illustrator's paper, but it was really smooth, slightly chalky, but very, very smooth. But there was some Bristol Board around, which is, and Bristol Board is what Marvel would supply their artists with. When I started working for Marvel professionally, they would send great packs of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it was all brushes and dip pens, so like a size 2 or 3 Sable brush, various kind of dip pens. I mean, I was using a Gillett and Whitman 404 or a 303. Those are the sizes if anybody wants to have a look for these things. But when I started working for Marvel, they would supply nibs as well for dip pens. And they had their own brands, and they were a lot smaller. They were a lot finer than the Gillett and Whitman ones that we had here, but essentially doing the same job. And I could never master a dip pen. I mean, they're just terrible. Stephen Baskerville loves all that stuff because he's an inker.
Yeah.
So brushes and pens and all that kind of thing. He absolutely loves it. And some people get amazing techniques and line flow and thick and thins out of all these things. But brush, I love to brush. Pen maybe for a little bit of detailing, but they so easily catch on the paper and then just go and kind of flick spatters of ink over the artwork, which is always a bit of a clunky thing. Or they just distribute so much ink onto the paper when you draw a line that it's very easy to smudge it. You literally have to try and, when you're inking it, start in the top left-hand corner and work your way down so that your hand doesn't go over anything that you've inked. Although, top tip from Mr. Dave Gibbons, that I learnt, which completely saved the day, was never ink with pure ink. So you use Indian ink because it's waterproof.
Yeah.
So you get a bottle of Indian ink, and what most people would do they would dip their brush in, or they'd dip their their nib into the ink and then ink with it. But he said water it down. I mean, you can almost water it down 50-50, but certainly 1/3 water and then 2/3 ink.
Okay.
And by doing that, it dries much quicker on the paper
Right.
because it soaks in when you've watered it down a
Yep.
bit, and you don't necessarily notice it. It doesn't go all kind of washy and grey, and it's certainly black enough to be able to reproduce when it's scanned for printing. But that was an absolute game changer for me when he said water the ink down. So thank you,
Okay.
Dave. I'm sure you're not listening, but if ever you hear this,
You never know.
you never know. That was a really, really useful top tip. So, so I mean, in terms of penciling, yeah, you can use an HB pencil. I mean, one of the best instruction manuals for all of this kind of stuff that no self-respecting comic book artist of my generation or the generation or two following that would ever admit to having was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by Stan Lee and John Buscema. And it's an absolute Bible for any artist.
Yeah.
I thoroughly recommend it to anyone because it does talk about those old drawing techniques, and it's like we said about a lot of contemporary methods, and certainly with digital technology, if you understand the kind of processes that digital is trying to replicate, and you know how to use those original tools, even if it's not very well, you get far better results from your digital product because you know what it is you're trying to achieve. And obviously digital has its own merits, and there are lots of things it does that the old analog methods don't. But in terms of just quality of illustration, thick and thin lines, how and when to use thick and thin lines, I think if you know those old techniques, it definitely informs quality artwork, whether it's digital or analog.
Back in the day, there just weren't many how-to books for comics, were there? Obviously, there was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. There was another one, and the name escapes me, a kind of British published How to Draw Comics, but it was they were rare. It wasn't considered something you needed textbooks for, but that How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, it's the fundamentals. It's what we were saying last time, that you can evolve the tech and the techniques, but the fundamentals were really well covered in that book of page composition and many other kind of just basic layout, design, production things.
Yeah, there were, very much so. I mean, it covers perspective, it covers, to a degree, it covers anatomy, it covers, dynamic posing. And John Buscema was an absolute master of all of that. I mean, he is probably the biggest influence on my work because he is the guy that the first ever Marvel comic I bought was drawn by him, and he drew a ton of stuff. And his sense of drama and use of anatomy, in terms of dynamics, but also in terms of those kind of moments of pathos, he was an absolute master of it. I mean, so much action poses, but then there's that classic Avengers issue called Even an Android Can Cry, with the Vision, and it's one of those very, very quiet moment kind of issues or episodes, as it would be now for TV, Whereas there's a lot of talk, well, there's a lot of walking and talking and interaction between the characters, not an awful lot of action. There is some, but the 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 way that he got the emotion into the characters, just beautiful stuff. And I've definitely absorbed all of that when I was younger, and use it on, that all kind of filters through onto everything I do. So even with Transformers, it's like very um, blocky, solid characters, a lot of them without faces, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I loved trying to get emotion in, and
Yeah.
John Buscema's art would have fed into that in terms of body language and very, very subtle expressions. So How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way is a really key book for all those kind of things. So perspective, anatomy, page layouts, techniques, materials. Thoroughly recommend it. The other books that I picked up round, in those very, very early days, which I think, if I remember rightly, were mentioned to me by a guy that I was at college with, and he wasn't on the arts course, and he ended up being a writer. I worked with him on some kind of stuff that he'd written. A guy called Pat Kelleher, and I'm pretty sure it was him. He mentioned to me the Bern Hogarth anatomy books,
Okay.
which I still thoroughly recommend. Bern Hogarth was publishing those books kind of in the 70s, I would imagine, 60s, 70s, 80s. But Bern Hogarth, American guy from Chicago, was the artist on a newspaper strip of Tarzan,
Okay.
and it was very much applauded for its anatomical accuracy with relatively simple line work. And so Bern Hogarth's books, Dynamic Anatomy being the main one, I think. I don't know if they have a longer title than that, but basically it's Dynamic Anatomy. And then there's things like Dynamic Light and Shade, so like how to, shade stuff to show direction of lighting. And then he's done a book purely on how to draw hands, how to draw heads, all that kind of stuff. Brilliant. Because, like you say, there weren't that many books around at the time. So for me, the Bern Hogarth books and the Marvel book were the key ones. Nowadays, there are a ton of books and a ton of YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I kind of thought about this and thought, what would distinguish those books that we have now, especially all the manga books, as opposed to the books that I had when I was kind of learning this craft. And I think the key difference for me is that the books that I was mentioning that I was kind of looking at, and there were other anatomy books around about that time. The good thing about the Bern Hogarth ones was that he was a comics artist anyway, so it was a good translation of technique,
Yeah.
For budding comic book artists. But what they were about was about the craft. They were about, the fundamentals of the craft of illustrating this stuff. The books that you get now, especially if they're more manga orientated, are absolutely great, but they're more about the style rather than the fundamentals of the craft. And that is a huge difference, because if you learn to draw comics from a manga how to draw book, fantastic. You'll be really good at drawing manga, but it doesn't translate to any other kind of style or genre of book necessarily. So
when I was at Titan as a sort of staff editor, we worked on a series that I proposed called the first book was called Writers on Comic Script Writing, and it was interviews with writers. I think we interviewed Grant Morrison and whoever else was kind of hot at the time, and generally it's a really good Mark Salisbury, who I work with on the film stuff. He's a film journalist, and he did all the interviews, so he was very good at that side of it and getting the stuff out of they needed. And anyway, we did sequels. We did Writers on Comic Script Writing 2, we did Artists on Comic Art. Again, Gibbons brilliant chapter, and I thoroughly
Mm.
recommend tracking these down. And I learned a lot from these. It's really kind of worth your while, because you see lots of different approaches to the same thing, but again,
Yeah.
you'll see the fundamentals keep coming up all the time.
Yeah, they do, very much so. I mean, I don't know where Dave Gibbons, like, how did he learn his craft? I have no idea. I mean, David Lloyd was the other person I got to know really well back then. Um, and he came from a completely different discipline. He was in no way influenced by American comic books. And to a certain degree, the influences on David Lloyd from the kind of British comics that I would have been reading, he would have definitely been aware of all of those and seen those. But there were certain artists who were a big influence on him, and some probably Alex Toth and people like that, European artists and some American artists, but certainly from the more avant-garde end of things, which you can definitely see then in Dave's work. I mean, certainly in V for Vendetta, he was kind of minimizing the amount of line work. It's all to do with light and shade.
Yeah.
So just solid areas of black for shadow and just let the eye fill in the detail.
And it's strange with both those artists, David Lloyd, Dave Gibbons, they both seem to kind of emerge almost fully formed in my mind, that there
Yeah.
wasn't that curve. Normally, with most artists, writers, you can see the creative curve where they hone their craft and master the do's and don'ts. But I'd seen some of Dave Gibbons' really earliest work, and it just looked like he came straight out of the traps. And same with David Lloyd. They just seem
Mm.
to sort of know it. I mean, I'm sure both of them would probably say, "Oh no, 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 we went through the same exact kind of trial and error thing." But it just seems that way to me when I see early Dave Gibbons stuff. It looks pretty much like later Dave Gibbons stuff. I'm sure he improved because that's what happens, but some, I think, sort of have a longer learning curve than others, or they come in having done all the hard work.
Yeah. The one for me who seemed to arrive fully formed at a very young age, whose work was astonishingly good, was Steve Dillon. The bless him, the
Yes.
late Steve Dillon. Could not believe when I was in the SSI, we did an event. I think it was some kind of publicity event for a stationery company. Like I don't even know who it was, De Laroni or one of these kind of people. And so some of the high profile artists within the SSI, Steve Dillon being one of them, was set up with drawing boards to kind of draw live in front of people.
Okay.
And I can remember sitting next to Steve while he was drawing a page of Press Button.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this was going to be the published page. I mean, he wasn't just like doing sketches like we do now. He was actually got like a full size piece, of A3 Bristol board, and he was doing it. And the thing that totally blew me away, given that at the time he was probably 19. I mean, he was so young. And he got the page, and there was some very, very faint kind of pencil lines on it. But he put a little ink dot with a brush. He drew with a brush with ink. No pen work. It was a brush.
Mm-hmm.
Put a little dot on the page, and then he put another little dot a bit further down, and then he just started drawing with ink. Like there
Okay.
was no. And the dots were just for him to say, "Oh, I need the top of the head here, and then
Yeah.
the whatever is here," and then he would just start drawing with a bit
Wow.
like what's his name, Kim Jung Shi, the Korean artist who died a few years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Who's just the best
Mm.
like line work ink artist I've ever seen in all the comics I've ever seen, all the line work illustrators I've ever seen. He was an absolute phenomenon who sadly died far too young. I'll put his name in the notes, and the people
Yeah.
can look him up. If you're not aware of him, you will be absolutely blown away. Anyway, so yeah, Steve Dillon, just a
Yeah.
total master at a very very early age. The other things in terms of techniques that there were because a bit like you with your typewriter and Tipex, I mean the
Yeah.
equivalent of that for artists was
Yeah.
something called process white, which was just like
Mhm.
a little pot of essentially white paint, but it was very white so that you could make corrections by painting over black lines. But it
Yeah.
was called process white because it was pure white, and when the art was scanned, sometimes if you used, some people used Tipex or used just white paint, white gouache paint or whatever, but sometimes it just shows up as a grey blob.
Yeah.
It's like kind of grey blob, but process white was pure white. So there was that, and then obviously there was zippertone, those kind of
Yes.
sheets
Yeah.
of dots that people used to cut out and stick into areas that they wanted to be shaded.
Yep.
I mean, in British comics, traditional British comic book artists were masters of rendering light and shade purely with black ink, solid blacks, and some hatching. American artists, some were incredibly good at that, but because American comic books were color, you didn't need to shade that kind of stuff. It was just very much line work with some what they call feathering, just to show the form of an arm or whatever. But then for areas of shade, they would drop in zippertone, so it's just those areas of dots. And zippertone or letratone, as we had here, that kind of self-adhesive sheets of dots, is very much a thing with manga.
Yeah.
They use it a lot in manga, which is fine. But I did use some of that, not much. When Stephen Baskerville was inking some of my work, he would use some of that early on because hatching takes a bit of time, which is drawing lots of lines
Yeah.
to kind of make an area, kind of tone it down. And if you don't get it right, it just looks like an absolute dog's dinner.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I remember. I mean, I recently was reading one of the Marvel Masterworks, and it was a Tomb of Dracula, and it was Tom Palmer's process, and he used
Yeah,
lots of, even on Gene Colan, who was this, a lot of texture in there anyway. He used a lot of zippertone and just for whole areas for shadow and things like that, and it's like you didn't really notice it at the time, it was used so well, but yeah,
yeah,
huge amounts apparently. So there you go.
yeah. I think the other thing with the American printing processes back in the day, like pre, how it's done now with digital coloring, but when it was the old 9-sheet method, which I think we've discussed before, where it was,
Yeah.
so they were just using percentage tones of cyan, magenta, and yellow, and then overlaying those to get different colors.
Yeah.
But to get darker areas of those, because those are, pure, fairly pure colors, they always maintain their brightness. But if you wanted it to be darker, I guess that's when they would put in zippertone, so the
Yeah.
color would lay over those black dots. But then, sort of, later on in that, in the use of those kind of techniques, they introduced K tones, so they actually used dots of black in the printing process differently. So you could you could achieve that without the artist or the inker having to use zippertone. So that was okay. But of course we don't have that now. I mean it's digital. So I find it interesting that we're in this period now where there's a bit of a kickback at the moment against a lot of digital, and that's largely because of how confronted people are by AI. So they're very much embracing older methods and analog methods. I mean, across life. I'm not just talking about art, but you see a lot of it on Instagram reels or TikTok or whatever, that people's lifestyle choices now are kind of winding back a bit. There's these kind of
Hmm.
neo-Luddites where they are not embracing technology. Their mobile phone will be an old Nokia, all that kind of stuff. But
Well,
but in terms,
I was going to say, here's an exclusive just based on that. Uh, you're drawing some Transformers at the moment, aren't you? And I'm not going to say what it's for, but you're actually
yeah.
doing some Transformers pages. Now, how have you chosen to do those, or will you choose to do those?
Well, apart from the fact that I'm still hampered physically with my hand, the operation, so it's fortunately the deadline is creeping a bit, not by me, but possibly by them. So we'll have time to
Yeah,
do it. But anyway, I I th- oh, I think I will do it digitally,
right.
and I tend to work digitally now. Um, Purely because back in the day, in the old days of ink and whatever, especially when I was at college, I was notorious for being clumsy. And the number of ink spills that I had, I don't even want to think about it. Um, so the digital is my friend purely because I don't spill stuff. I don't get it all smudged over my hand and lean across it, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was all a bit of a nightmare for me. Um, but I
But
think it's largely because of speed of delivery.
yeah,
You can draw quicker, you can correct quicker, you can then digitally send it to people. Um,
yes,
in terms of new technology, I don't have a problem with that. I work digitally. I've got very used to it. Um, in my own books, Horizon was a mixture of digital and analog. I mean, the pages were all pencil drawn,
yeah,
but then kind of inked in inverted commas in or coloured in Photoshop. Oxygen was mostly fully digital, and all the storyboarding work I do now is fully digital, just to be able to
yeah,
manage the files.
of course.
Um, but so I will probably do the Transformers project completely digitally. I've I have got another project that I've been asked to work on, which is essentially a GI Joe project, kind of, but
Okay,
it's essentially a GI Joe project. I am toying with the idea of doing that on ink on Bristol board. I
okay.
don't know why, but there's something that makes me. I think I'll tell you, I do know exactly why. I'm toying with doing it like that because of all these GI Joe sketches that I've been doing for patrons that I've got, and so I've very much enjoyed doing those on card with whatever I use at the time. Sometimes it's fiber tip pens, sometimes it's brushes and inks and whatever. But in terms of that whole kind of Luddite thing, I don't have a problem with digital, and although I do use them myself occasionally, I'm increasingly having a problem with single-use plastic fiber tip pens.
Yeah.
And I have mentioned this on social media. I kind of in my Instagram feed, I bumped into the work of um, a young British female comic or graphic novel artist.
Hmm.
Um, I don't say that for any reason other than it kind of gives a bit of context. In as much as I really liked her work, but as a young female, it's the kind of stuff that I then share to my granddaughter. She's 15 and she's a budding artist, so it's like look
Yeah.
at this girl. Her work's really cool. You could don't copy it obviously, but it just
No.
inspires youngsters as to what's possible. As to you too could work hard and get published, that kind of thing. Anyway, her work is really good, really really beautiful work that she was doing, but she was using like micron pens and all that kind of thing, and that's absolutely fine. But
Mm.
I did comment, maybe I wasn't being a grumpy old man. I was just saying I love your work. Um, try have a go at using more traditional methods. Use a dip pen and a brush, or if you can't handle a dip pen, use a fountain pen because you can buy
Hmm.
fountain pens that you draw with.
Yeah.
Um, and I would love to see people go back to those kind of things. A, because they're not single-use plastic; they are refillable.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a world where there's enough landfill.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the other great thing about the old school approach is you end up with pages of artwork that you can sell.
Absolutely. Yes, which is where you were trying to lead to when you first asked me, I'd imagine.
Yes, yeah.
And I went off on a great long.
No, that's fine. Because I was wondering, particularly with the Transformers pages, whether you'd feel that was worth your while. But I get that the time and the hand may be an issue. But you'll end up with physical pages of.
Hang on a minute, we're crackling. We're at the crackle point.
Yeah. Okay, just next moment.
Right, I'm just going to pause it. Yeah, it's yeah, no, it is a really good point. I mean, that is the thing that with digital artwork, a lot of people miss out on. They miss out on the opportunity of selling original art, but even just displaying it. I mean, I've got so much art, especially covers from my Marvel days, that I don't sell because they're just really nice as exhibition pieces. But there's also a strange thing that's happened with original art when people do sell original art, and I have this in my portfolio as well because I've been around for so long. So there's very much a distinction between original art that's more recent that I've done when I have used kind of analog processes to sell, and the stuff that I did for Marvel back in the day. And one of the biggest differences is the presence of speech balloons. So on the old artwork from the old Marvel days, it's got speech balloons on it, which is a nice complete piece of comic book art to put in a frame. It's great because you can read it and think, oh, that's wow, that's actually that piece of work. Whereas now, because all the speech balloons are done digitally, I don't think anybody. I mean, I'm sure there are some purists who still draw and letter by hand, but generally in mainstream publishing they just don't. It's all done digitally. So the artwork is great in as much as it all the art's there. It's not covered up by any speech balloons, but you also really have no context as to what on earth is going on that particular page.
No.
But then beyond that, and this came up with when we did Transformers Regeneration 1. So I was drawing that stuff on paper. So it was because I'd worked in an animation studio and then been doing a lot of work, not as an animator, but as a concept artist. But because I was using all the materials in the animation studio, which is 15 field animation paper and, blue color arrays, pencils and whatever. So I was using all those materials to draw the regen pages. So the original pencils are all on paper, and it's just pencil. But then I would scan those in and send them to Stephen Baskerville, who's the inker. And Stephen Baskerville is very analog. Like, he loves still just real ink. He's an inker, to his core. I think ink runs through his veins. So I would scan in and email the regen pages. He would then, in Photoshop, convert those pencil lines to blue, because blue doesn't show up when it's scanned for a printing plate. So, and then he would print it out on a piece of Bristol board so that he could then manually ink over those blue lines.
Okay.
So you end up with two pieces of original art, in inverted commas. So like back in the day, the piece of art you would have all the processes on it. So it would have the penciler, the inker, and the letterer. Whereas now it's all broken up into its different constituent parts. So people could buy the original pencils from me, and they could buy the original inks from Stephen.
Yeah.
Which is kind of bonkers.
I mean, I've got a page, you probably can't see it, but there's a page of Death's Head Death's Head artwork up here. And, that has got, of course, all the lettering on it, which makes it far more special. That it's the whole story. It's my
Yeah.
work. It's Jeff's work, and yeah, it's definitely one. It's lacking now that it doesn't have, for me, the lettering on the original art.
Yeah. So who lettered that page you've just had?
Probably Annie Halfacree at the time, but now Annie
Right.
Parkhouse.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's great, and any splash pages have title logos, and sometimes the old Transformers strip across the top.
Yeah.
Still, from where it was, literally glued and pasted onto the art.
Yeah. Yeah. It had all that stuff. Yeah. Um,
Well, we should we could probably talk more about this, but we're kind of coming up to our time,
I think
so
we are. Yeah.
we might roll this on. One thing I just wanted to drop in at the end was, in a very bizarre way, I once wrote a how to draw book. I know.
Did it sell very well, Simon?
Well, the book was called "You Can Draw Transformers," and it was part of a series. So I had a
Okay.
sort
Yeah.
of template to work from, and it was Transformers. So, I mean, obviously, I didn't do any of the art. That was all Guido and other
Yes.
artists. But I actually thought, I can't really write this book. And then I thought, yes, I can. I'm an editor. I know the process.
Yeah.
And so I put it together, and Guido kind of took a look at it, and just generally, weirdly, it worked out really well. But I just thought, oh yeah, I suppose I'm an editor, so I should know and should be able to talk people through the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did. I think it's it's hard to find now. It's been out of print for a long time, but I was really pleased with how it came out.
Yeah. And obviously, Transformers are a very specific thing. So,
Mm,
just getting that kind of mech look,
yeah,
and I mean, the rules of perspective when you're drawing that stuff are all the same, but they, you apply them slightly differently in
yeah,
a way. And the other thing is, in terms of understanding your craft, you need to know all those rules to be able to break them to good effect,
yeah.
which is absolutely key. Good
And
stuff.
maybe, yeah, and maybe we can roll this on to next time. But we were going to mention, at least briefly, that we're going to be collaborating again
Mm,
on a project. So we're going to disinter and revamp the engine, the thing we worked on back in the day, and look to probably kickstart something for next year. So we'll
yeah.
maybe talk more about that next time. Very
Yeah,
exciting.
that'd be quite good. Do we want to pick up next time any more about these processes? Or we'll just leave. We'll kick that down the road and leave that for another time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe we'll go back to something different next time, but
Yeah,
yeah, we'll maybe talk more about, as a mixture, a little bit about how our process will probably end up being on the engine, the revamped,
yes,
reimagined engine.
yeah. That's going to be very different. Yeah, we're kind of creating a different way of doing things.
Yeah. And, in the way we've spoken about that, you've worked on Oxygen Horizon and I've worked on 5 Points and To the Death, the process when you're collaborative is slightly different again.
Yeah, yes, very much so. Very good. Okay,
Great
that was
stuff. Well,
fun.
yes, thanks everyone for tuning in as always. And yeah, we'll be back with more of something. We don't quite know what, but we'll certainly talk more about our plans for the engine.
Yeah. And just before we sign off, any questions? Can I request, if you have any questions, you send them into wildfurproductions@gmail.com. You can put them in the chat on Patreon, but if you email them, that would be great. And also, if you haven't already checked out all our audio listeners who are listening out there on Spotify and Apple and all that kind of stuff, if you want to check out more kind of detail on how to see this as a video and extra content, etc., you can look at our Patreon page, which is at wildfur.net. Good. All right,
Right.
Simon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Will do. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfur production.